Welcome to the Podcast Interview Marketing Show, where we help you move beyond funnels and hacks to have real, meaningful conversations with your ideal prospects. This is to grow your brand and to grow your business. I'm your host, Tom Schwab, and today's episode is a must listen for anyone who's ever felt, like they just didn't fit the mold and they didn't want to. Today, we're joined by Iron Mike Steadman. Now, Iron Mike, he's a Naval Academy graduate. He's a combat veteran. He's a Marine. He's a founder of the Misfits, and he's host of the Frontline Voices podcast over at Stanford's Hoover Institute. Mike is redefining what it means to be a small E entrepreneur by helping underdogs, misfits, and military veterans carve out their own categories and build niches and profitable businesses, all without selling out or blending in. In this episode, we unpack what it means to be a category of one, why most marketing advice doesn't really work for entrepreneurs, and how founder-led content is changing the game. Mike shares the 4 must-follow rules for surviving and thriving in business, and he explains why podcast interviews are one of the most powerful tools for building category authority. If you're tired of playing someone else's rules and you're ready to build a business that truly reflects you, this episode is going to light a fire under you. Well, you may know him as the host of the Frontline Voices podcast over at Stanford University with Hoover Institute there. You may have heard of Iron Mike. You may have actually worked with them, but I got to say, he is, to me, a friend, a mentor, somebody I've learned so much from, and I'm excited to talk about everything that I've learned from him. And Mike, thank you so much for being here.
Tom, thanks for having me, man. You're an OG in the space, and it's a pleasure to be able to chop it up with you today.
Well, and it's early on, I thought that was old guy. And so either way, I'll own it, right? I love the way that you talk about you're the chief misfit, right? I've always called myself the chief evangelist officer because I don't want to be a CEO. But then I saw chief misfit. I'm like, oh, that is awesome. Can you unpack that a little bit? What that means to you?
Yeah. So I run a category design studio for Underdogs and Misfits, called The Misfits. And we focus on military veteran founders and CEOs and anyone else that's used to being one-on-one in a room. And, you can relate to this. Both of us are military veterans. Both of us are Naval Academy grads. And then you transition out of the military. And now you're in this kind of different world per se. And all of us are trying to kind of find our place within it. And as my confidence has grown as an entrepreneur over the years, from Ironbound Boxing to, my podcast company, Ironbound Media, I just realized that I was a lot more comfortable being different and thinking different, and that there were other people like me out there, particularly from the military veteran community. And so what I did was I just rebranded Ironbound Media into the Misfits to allow me to attract more the type of people I wanted to work with. A lot of them actually self-identify as underdogs and misfits for a variety of reasons. And, what we're going to be talking about today is, how do you differentiate yourself as a small E entrepreneur? How do you create a category of one for yourself? And, with category design, I was early in it, and I've been able to really establish a strong niche for myself in it today. Again, it wasn't overnight. It was a gradual evolution to that. And again, that just kind of puts me on the outside of a lot of traditional kind of marketing and branding agencies, because you advised me early on. Remember when we were talking about podcasting, you said, hey, make sure you're charging premium rates, because if you charge too little, there's a lot of competition out there and you don't want to play there. And so I really did take that to heart, and have just always kind of kept it in the back of my mind, because the goal is to eliminate the competition so that it's irrelevant.
Yeah. And it's that idea of you've got to value yourself there. And I love how clear your point of view is in your marketing in there, right? To say misfits and underdogs, that's one of those things where people will turn you up or turn you off, right? They either resonate or they don't with it. And I think too many people are trying to be lukewarm to everyone, right? They want more leads, right? I got to get more leads in. And it's the idea of that. No, we're trying to find the right people, right? And be very clear in that point of view to, attract them or repel them.
Yeah, I lost prospects because of that. They're like, I'm not really resonating. I'm like, it's fine. You're not for me. The other thing is, you and I know, like, the world has evolved. All of us are tech-enabled businesses and stuff, et cetera. And so I was also kind of projecting a little bit because, I don't come from that Silicon Valley background. I don't have an MBA from an elite business school, and instead of running from it, I just kind of led into it and said, hey, I'm a misfit. I ain't a product manager. I'm not a product marketing guy. That's not me, right? If you want that, go talk to these people over here, but if you want help going from -1 and 1 to beyond, or rebranding and choosing a new market category, then I'm definitely the one you need to talk to.
Well, we can argue because as the older I get, the more I realize that you and I both went to an amazing business school, right? We never took a finance or a marketing course at Annapolis, but it was all about leadership. It was all about adversity. It was all about, getting punched in the nose and keep going, right? I can't think of a lot of other business schools where every student has to take boxing and wrestling as a freshman.
100%. And I try to bring that into, just kind of how I show up in the world, because you can talk about one thing online like all day, every day. That's just kind of not how I am. I love entrepreneurship. I love category design, but I also love, the stuff outside of, business as well. And, physical fitness, adventure, and I try to incorporate a lot of that stuff into my content when I can. And I do credit the Naval Academy with that kind of self-leadership that it instilled. I still carry something to write with, I still try to get my morning workouts in to the best of my ability. I still try to read, books on leadership and keep myself accountable and stuff.
Yeah. Well, we were last summer. We got together at the Naval Academy Alumni Entrepreneurship Summit. And it was a great event, but that word entrepreneurship means so many different things to different people, right? We got Jim Matheson at Harvard, and he's working with people on some really, really hard problems like fusion, right? Fusion, you need hundreds of billions of dollars to figure out, right? And, you helped me understand that idea of big E entrepreneur and little e entrepreneur. And you had mentioned that a couple of times here. Can you explain what you mean by little e entrepreneur?
Yeah. So essentially, like, entrepreneurship is all over the place right now. You got ETAs, entrepreneurship through acquisition, people that buy like a cash flowing business and then purchase it. You've got entrepreneurship that's kind of been hijacked, to be honest, by, Silicon Valley, right? Like, people think entrepreneurship, they think raising a bunch of capital from venture capital firms, and then scaling to $1 bazillion. You got small business owners who are like the majority of entrepreneurs in America, if we're just being honest, but they just aren't kind of brought out. I don't want to say mainstream anymore, but there's just this tension, right? But when I think about like little e entrepreneurs, I'm really talking about, small business owners. And I can't take credit for this. This actually comes from my mentor, Christopher Lockhead. He talked about this book in his book, Niche Down. But, it's small business owners and those of us that like to build niche, profitable businesses. Sometimes that can be a 1 to 3 person little online business. Maybe it's a 10-person business. Maybe it's a small construction management firm. I really think it speaks to those misfits that aren't represented in the, public markets, venture-backed startups, just more those of us that are, eating what we kill, per se.
I remember talking with a client. He was a publicly traded CEO, right? And he was launching his next act before he retired as CEO. And he said how much he admired small business CEOs. And at first I thought, okay, he's just sort of, shining me on here. He's like, no, you don't understand. Little e entrepreneurs are making huge bets all the time, right? Because this is your family. This is your livelihood. The people that you work for, work for you, that's their livelihood. He's like, you're betting the farm continually, right? And he's like, me, I've got, if I do a great job or I do a lousy job, it's probably not going to change it that much. And if I do a really lousy job, he's like, I don't lose my house. I get kicked out with the golden parachute. So it's that idea of little league entrepreneurs. I don't think we should look down on them. If anything, I think they've got a better position in the world today.
Yeah. And it's a different game. So I always call them corporate refugees, right? So let's say you work in corporate America, you've got this great marketing experience, or you learn some other skill, and now you're ready to branch out on your own, right? Start your own business. Or let's say you help a startup or help another small business. It's a completely different ball game, right? Like, number one, if you work with a small business and you go, say, to the restroom and there's no toilet paper in the restroom, guess what? You better go to, CVS and buy some toilet paper or something, because there is no one else, right? It's all in it together. And the other aspect of it is, when they try to start stuff themselves, they quickly realize that I had that big brand protection. When I pick up the phone and say I'm a wealth advisor and I call you, Tom, and I say, hey, I'm with Goldman Sachs, right? You already know what's up. There's some trust there, et cetera. When you say, hey, my name is Mike Steadman, I just threw up a shingle, I'm a wealth advisor. Now you no longer have that brand protection. And that's a punch in the face that a lot of people are not expecting. And what they have to understand is, when you're taking something from -1, right, literally an idea, back a napkin sketch, and you're bootstrapping it, right? That is a drastically different approach than what you're going to learn in business school, what you're going to learn, reading online and whatnot. And I have found, and I would love your perspective on it, that I feel like it's a muscle like anything else. Like, you got to get in the gym and you got to learn the art of like going to market, getting punched in the face, learning how to read the market, learning how to spot category opportunities, learning how to stay alive as a business owner, right? These are all skill sets you cannot learn, sitting on the side of the pool. And, I think guys like you and myself are like, we're the frontline voices, literally and figuratively, of like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah. And you call it corporate refugees. I think you could say the same thing about veteran refugees. And, I'm quite a bit older, right? With my year group, I'm class of 87. So I saw guys getting out at 20 and 30. And, I got out after 5 years, and it was hard enough making that switch from, if you want to call it, corporate world of the Navy, and to go out into the other world. And I see that people that were in there for 20 years or 30 years, and that could be the military or in the corporate world, it's almost like you get institutionalized, that you think, well, this is the way it is. You've got to have the HR department. You've got to have all these support facilities, right? There's no way I could do it by myself. And I think that sometimes the people that have the least experience, right, are sometimes the most effective, because they don't know what they don't know. It's almost like that, the gift of wisdom, or no, the curse of experience there, right? Of that, if I've got so much experience, well, I'll tell you all the reasons that it won't work. But if you got somebody that has a new viewpoint on it, they just go out and make it happen.
100%. And it's funny you mentioned about the kind of thinking that it takes, because you and I work with remote teams. I have an amazing head of content. Her name is CJ, right? And whenever we work on engagements with either our own clients or some of our other clients that, bring us in, we're part of the embedded team, et cetera, they don't truly understand the relationship me and CJ have. Like, CJ is, you talking to CJ, you might as well be talking to me. She's not some random vendor from the internet. Like, and it's interesting even kind of paying attention to how, like, oh, that's how they run things in their company. Like, there's really no autonomy, authority. And that some of these people that they have on these calls, I don't want to use the word peon, but like, they have no authority, right? They have no real ability to, what's the word? Economic buyer, right? I think, who talks about Alan Dib? Is it Alan Dib or Alan Weiss talks about that? And it's just a interesting dynamic that I'm always noticing, because they're just not used to, teammates having as much authority as she does.
Yeah. I looked at it through the framework of the viewpoint that Eddie Yoon talks about, where he talks about missionaries and mercenaries, right? When you work for a corporation, right? You're there for the job. You get promoted, everything like that. Well, I think the small E entrepreneurs are largely missionaries. They're doing this because, man, it's in their DNA. They've got to do it. And those people that are attracted to them are also the missionaries, right? They could get better benefits, probably better pay at a big company, right? But they couldn't get better experience. They couldn't get better learning environment, and they believe in what they're doing. So I think sometimes as I look at the small E entrepreneurs, those are a bunch of missionaries, not only the founder, but everybody that works for him too. And that's energizing.
And that's why I made that comment about, there's no toilet paper in the bathroom. You got to go buy toilet paper, because it truly is a team effort. When you're dealing with niche, profitable small businesses, right? Teammates have leverage, because in order for me to do what I do, I need to make sure this aspect of the business is covered down on. And I need to know that whoever I have in that role, I can trust them, and they feel trusted, and they feel empowered, and they can make decisions on their own, that they can, stay 2 to 3 steps ahead of you at all times. And so it's just a different relationship. And I feel, I envy the people. I'm pretty sure the people that work in corporate at times kind of envy that, but I don't think a lot of them truly understand that.
Yeah. And it's a great, superpower that we have to have teams that are missionaries, right? I think of last fall, we started to realize that AI was indexing podcast interviews, right? We needed to get more exposure out there. Well, I already do about 1 interview a week, and I just didn't want to keep doing more and more and more, right? So we were able to find some of the key people in our team that could talk about it, right? And they're like, you trust me to represent the brand out on podcast interviews? I'm like, you represent the brand every day, right? Every day that you work with the client. And they've been able to tap into different markets, talk about different things. And I'm so proud of them, right? Because, the Misfits is not the Michael show, right? It's not the Iron Mike Steadman show. It's everybody there. And it's the same way. It's, there's a reason that my picture is not plastered all over the website.
Same thing for mine, right? Ironbound Boxing, all Mike, right? Then, I did Ironbound Media, started to pull back a little bit more. When I saw the Misfits, I saw the opportunity to pull back a little bit more. And because, again, what I'm really doing is marketing the category, right? Owning the problem, and then being synonymous with the solution.
So many people that are the small E entrepreneurs will say, well, if I only had a big budget, what I need is more budget so I can be every place, all the rest of this. And they don't realize that they've got a leverage over someone else, right? You don't need to do everything with a big budget. And you talk a lot about that.
Yeah. I think it's just kind of how it's come up, right? So how you enter entrepreneurship, I believe, can dictate your experience with it. So like, let's say you and I's first business was a restaurant, right? That is a notoriously hard business. That's a notoriously hard category. It is hand-to-hand combat every day. And let's say that business fails, right? Now you're jaded, okay? And your first experience with a business is restaurant, right? Now you got to bounce back from that, okay? Or let's say you come into entrepreneurship like me, not well capitalized, trying to figure things out, and realizing that I have the gift of gab per se, and that I need to leverage this as much as possible by getting on television, getting scrappy, creating content and stuff, etc. And so because that's how I came into the game, I've been able to build off that continuously. And so my first default when it comes to kind of marketing and branding, I tend to gravitate to more scrappiness. It's like, hey, let's get the story. Let's get the category. Let's grab the point of view. Let's pick the platforms to get it out there. But I realize now that it sounds so easy to me, but to other people, it's absolutely terrifying. The idea of recording themselves or doing a podcast or creating content, even posting on social, it gives them damn near a panic attack.
That's a great thing, right? Because if the vast majority of the people look at that and say, I don't want to do that, it gives the advantage to those that do, right? Most of the people would say, I never want to be an entrepreneur, right? I want the stability of a paycheck, right? But the problem is then they get laid off and there's no stability. Now you flip through and say, well, okay, even if you are an entrepreneur, right? Like it or not, I think a lot of it today is founder-led marketing. People want to know who the person is behind the business. And that's even going for big E entrepreneurs and little E entrepreneurs, right? You can think of, all the big companies. I remember seeing a study that, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Sir Richard Branson, their social media following is always 10 times that of their company. And that was at a EO meeting, and the person challenged us to look at what our followings were and then look at what our company's followings were. And it was pretty much a 10-1, right? So if you want your company to grow online, you need to lead and do that. And so it's one of those things where, yeah, it is uncomfortable, but it's something that needs to be done. And I think today it's more accessible than ever.
Yeah. But it's like you and I have been at it for a while at this point, and we take for granted that there's still a lot of people that never been a guest on a podcast, let alone host one. Right. But I think you're right. Like, I was listening to a podcast this morning about, the rise of like founder-led kind of content, and how, when I was growing up, nobody knew the CEO was Sears, or JC Penney's or whatever. But today it's like, companies are associated with people. I think that's a combination of these social media platforms, they were never monetizing the individual platforms. They were always monetizing the business pages, and we're doing janky stuff to make that happen. And so there was a natural rise of like, hey, we don't want to build up our business page because they're going to charge us to access our audience. Let's just stay native and organic on our personal channels. And I think that's one of the things that's led to that. I think the other thing is there's just so much content out there these days, right? 24/7, 7 days a week, et cetera, that the human component is more important now than ever. And I think, again, that's why you're seeing the rise of more kind of founder-led content. But I also think it's a trap at times.
Tell me more about that.
When you think of Martin Luther King, what do most people think of? The civil rights movement, okay? When you think of Elon Musk, people think of Tesla, space, going to Mars, right? They think of big tech, okay? They think of Doge, all that stuff, right? I think one of the and Lockheed will agree with this because I actually agree with him on this, is that personal branding is a vanity play. What the really thing needs is, what do you want to be known for? When I think of Thomas Schwab, I think of obviously Interview Valet, podcast guesting, because you've pounded the pavement on that. You wrote the playbook on it. You got in the game early. It's not like the Thomas Schwab show, and people will win these little, marketing battles, but they'll miss the war. The goal is to be synonymous with something. What do you want to be synonymous with? For me, it's veteran entrepreneurship, and it's category design for military veterans, And so when you see a lot of content I put out, you very rarely see me solo dolo. I'm always amplifying and platforming, others. And by default, that associates with that. And I just see a lot of people making a mistake, because you and I both know there's a lot of broke influencers out there.
And I think it's the difference between influencers and experts, right? And a lot of people have spent their way into being influencers, right? It's almost a joke at times where you see somebody holding up the plaque that shows their 2 comma. And if you know them, that 2 comma club, yeah, they sold $1 million on something. And, they had 50% chargebacks, and Facebook made a lot of money off of it. And then they ended up buying the plaque so that they could look like they were famous and successful. And it's this idea of, if you want to be an influencer, just to be an influencer, that's an ego trip, right? Better to be known as an expert, right? If you have to call yourself an expert or an influencer, you're not, right?
Right. People need to see you as that.
Yes. You have to be called that. And it's like that question of, what do you believe in? And we've talked recently, I think one of the biggest harm that speech coaches are doing and podcast agencies are telling people, just go out there and tell your story, right? Just tell your story and people will come to you. It's like nobody cares about your story, right? My mom doesn't care about my story, right? She's got a different version of my story. What people care about is their problem, right? And I've always said, we're all selling preparation H, right? All people care about is the pain in the rear end. If you can show that you can understand that, if you've got a solution to it, then they'll listen to you. And if your story supports that, that's fine. But the story is not your point of view. Your story supports your point of view.
100%. And you got to even have a point of view. See, people are lazy. They don't have a point of view. They don't have a point of view on like, hey, why, this type of CRM is not the best fit for, food truck owners, And why is that? Because let's say I'm a food truck owner. I've been doing it for years. And I realize that I just need something that's fast, mobile, that doesn't take a lot because I got to get back in the kitchen. And a lot of these platforms, they're just too integrated. There's too much going on, But you got to have an insight and you got to be able to articulate your point of view. So what I find is people don't. They literally don't have a point of view. They say, oh, we're struggling differentiating ourselves. What's your point of view? What's your category? What category do they think you're in? And what do you think, what's the category that you're really in? And, even when we start talking about expertise, I call it category authority, right? So when someone thinks of, let's say AI right now, right? There's a lot of talk about AI this, AI that, okay? But let's say there's AI for workforce development or AI for, AI small business automation, okay? There's a lot of business owners out here that are like, hey, I didn't grow up with this stuff. I don't know how to deal with that. I don't know how to navigate it. And what if there was someone out there that really understands this problem intimately and they're speaking on it and they're teaching people how to do it and they're showing people, the resources and tools and stuff. And so then somebody else sees that. And when they hear that their friend is struggling, bringing AI into their, their small business, they say, oh, you should talk to X. I know a guy. That's the goal. Is be the definitive category. I know a guy, I know a gal, I know a company. I tell everyone, category first, everything else second. If you don't know your category, neither do your customers.
And if you don't have a strong point of view, you're in that sea of sameness. That book, we had talked about it before by Alex M.H. Smith, right? No Bullshit Strategy. I love how he says in there that better is a synonym for the same. Right. So if you tell me I'm better than this other brand, right, or better than this other company, you just told me you do the same thing and your opinion is this, is that you're better. Well, they do the same thing and their opinion is that they do it better. Right. So you haven't differentiated yourself. You've almost just degraded yourself into throw me in this bucket with everybody else.
Yeah. Have you, when did you start listening to podcasts?
Oh, geez. Now I'm going to really show my age. When I started to listen to podcasts was probably about 2008. This was the back when you had to take the iPod, download it from your computer, put the cable in, and then sync it from your computer to your iPod. And I think the iPod at that time could store, some ungodly number, like, 24 different podcasts at one time.
Okay. The reason I bring this up is there's been a lot of growth in the podcast space, obviously. Okay. And now it's so hard to keep up with podcasts, right? The interview shows now are nonstop and, everyone just kind of does the same thing. In 2025, for me to forward somebody a podcast, it's got to be a damn good podcast, right? And recently I came across a podcast with Kirk Franklin, the gospel singer, right? He does this video podcast where he basically invites people over to his house. They have dinner and they talk about, life, raising kids, being a business owner while having a family, the realities of what it's like and stuff, etc. And the format and the vulnerability and the way he speaks, it's just different. It's so good. But that's radically different than a lot of the other podcasts out there, So again, it goes back to thinking about what's your, I'm very critical of content these days because for me, I just feel like, there's so much more positivity we could be put in the world, and to go online and spread negativity and then do it on a public platform, right? I just think it's whack between me and you, you know? So when I come across content like that, I just like, man, I was so blown away by it. But again, you got to look at what everybody else is doing and say, what can I do that's unique? How can I bring a different point of view to this thing? You know, and how can I carve out a lane for myself?
Yeah, there was that one time where Gary Vaynerchuk said, everyone needs a podcast. And then Jordan Harbinger said, no one needs a podcast, right? And it wasn't, neither person was correct, but what the world doesn't need is another copy of a podcast, right? If somebody's already doing it, that sea of sameness, it's just noise then. You've got to have a different point of view, right? You've got to be something that's remarkable, meaning that people would make comments on it, just not background noise.
Yeah. And I think, I do categories. I was telling you when I started 5 years ago through your podcast, by the way, because with you being a Naval Academy grad and entrepreneur, I paid attention to what was on your bookshelf. I saw a book, Play Bigger. I looked it up. I read it. I read a lot of business books. That's the only book I had read about category design. That was my first time learning about it. And then I fell down that rabbit hole. And, in 2021, I read the book in 2020. I start want to learn category design, but like I wasn't, it was still too soon to lead with it, for me personally. So I had to find a Trojan horse, which was podcasting, right? And then in 2024, once I got confident, I said, I want to go all in on, category design and flip the switch. So lead with the category design, and we'll still occasionally do podcasts for content, but make no mistake, the goal of that is always to build category authority.
Exactly. And I would say to one step further, right, is to provide value for the market so that you can get value. And I think that's one of the things that I'd really want to touch on is that so many times with the biggie entrepreneurs, right, they talk about their burn rate, right, of how much money they're burning and stuff like that. And I can remember years ago, I used to take solace in that my business made more money than Amazon did, right? Because Amazon was never profitable. And people would talk about this. And it's like, no, for little entrepreneurs, we need to take it from idea to invoice really quick. So how do you see your work with category design, not only getting to the invoice quicker, but to make the invoice larger?
You'd be surprised how many people struggle with answering what it is they do and for whom, If you ask them, they talk for like 30 minutes, or they have an idea and they talk for 30 minutes. And what I found is that category, there's a psychology with it. So for example, imagine you and I meet, I don't know anything about you. And I say, Tom, what do you do? And you say, Mike, I coach first time service academy entrepreneurs to help them go from idea to invoice in 90 days or less. It's like, I don't know anything about you. I haven't looked you up or nothing, but I'm instantly curious because I'm an entrepreneur. I need to get an invoice. I want to get paid. So we just cut through all that other stuff. Now, obviously, when I look you up, it reinforces that, but it gets to that first curiosity where like, can I get your card? And what happens a lot of times is because most small entrepreneurs aren't prone to kind of categories, they don't realize that when you're taking a product or service to market for the first time, you got three options. Option number one is you can go head to head with an established player or behavior. So if we think about CRM, customer resource management, category king is Salesforce. Okay. That is established. It's locked in. Doesn't make any sense to compete with Salesforce, especially as a small entrepreneur that's bootstrapping. Okay. Option number two, you can niche down in a proven category with existing demand. So let's say we stay in the CRM category, but we realize again in our food truck example that, hey, I think there's an opportunity to introduce a CRM specifically for food trucks, right? I got a little capital. I think I can bootstrap this thing and I'm going to play there. And then option number three is you can create a new category altogether. And this is where you say, hey, food trucks, these little mobile businesses, they don't need a CRM. They need X, Y, and Z, right? Now, creating a new category, that's a whole separate conversation. Okay. When it comes to small entrepreneurs, 99.9% of the time, I recommend that they niche down in a proven category with existing demand, because in this way, you're not having to create demand. All you have to do is capture it. Right. And so what does that mean? That means when you sit down and somebody asks you, what do you do and for whom? And you say, oh, I own a business that does, CRMs for food trucks, or we are a CRM for food truck businesses. CRM, I don't have to guess what that means, because, all these other companies have pounded that category, so it's understood. Food trucks don't got to do that either. That's already understood. So it's easy. Right. And so really thinking through like, okay, what problem are you solving? Right. Because people solve problems with category first, everything else second. What do they Google? Law firm near me, Vietnamese restaurant near me, Asian restaurant near me. Let's say we stay in the Asian category. Well, what kind of food? Do you want sushi? That's a category. Do you want Korean barbecue? That's a category. Do you want a Chinese buffet? That's a category. So just understanding when people look at you on that first pass and they think about the problem you solve, what category are they associating that with? And what I challenge small entrepreneurs is stay 2 to 3 steps ahead at all time. You don't want to guess. You want to know going into that call what category you are and how you differentiate, because that's where people get confused. They're like, well, what makes you different than Salesforce or whatever? Or they say, oh, you kind of sound like a Uber for X. You've already lost, because to me, that means you haven't led them.
Yeah. And it's that strong point of view. And as you were talking about CRM and Salesforce, 2 of them came to mind. Spiro AI, great category design. If you ever see their logo, it's got the word CRM with this red circle and the line through it. It's like, how can you have a CRM company that says no CRM, right? They're saying we hate CRMs too. They were the first one to make it AI driven and make it easier. And it's like, who is that for? That is for people that have tried it and it's never worked for them, right? The other one, Doug Campbell-John is just coming out with one. The name of the CRM company is Coffee. And the tagline is coffee is for closers, right? There's a lot of people that won't understand that reference, but any salesperson that has seen Glenn Ross, they're like, they know that. And all you got to say, coffee is for closers. Oh, that's a CRM that was designed for top sales reps, not for just enterprise.
Yeah. Another example I like to use is beer, right? So let's think right now. Okay. If I go anywhere in the world, I don't drink alcohol, but if I ask people, hey, what's a Jamaican beer? Red Stripe. Okay. That wasn't by accident. That was by design. The founders of Red Stripe looked at the category of beer and said, hey, we can't take on Budweiser, some of these more established brands, but we can carve out this niche around Jamaican beer. Right. And just like Jamaican beer is synonymous, it's just like Red Stripe is synonymous with Jamaican beer, and jerk chicken is synonymous with Jamaican cuisine. It's like, what do you want to be synonymous with? You've got non-alcoholic. What I tell people too is you got to read the room. So, for someone that doesn't drink, 5 years ago, if you walk into a bar in New York City and you say, hey, do you have any non-alcoholic options? They look at you like you're crazy. They're like, why would you walk into a bar if you don't drink? We can make you a Sprite or something. But you fast forward to today, every bar in New York City has mocktails on the menu. What does that signal? Mocktails is an emerging category, and then you start doing a little category science. Alcohol consumption is on the decline, right? Non-alcoholic options are on the rise. People are looking for alternatives, right? And so you got to be able to read the room too.
Definitely. Well, Mike, thank you so much. What is ordinary to you is amazing to others. If there's one thing that you would say to small entrepreneurs today, what would the words of wisdom be?
Man, that's a great question. I have my quick 4 rules of entrepreneurship. Number 1, stay alive. Businesses fail for primarily 2 reasons. Number 1, no market need. And number 2, they run out of cash. If you find a good category, you'll be good. Okay. But you got to invoice up front. Okay. Number 2, don't take business advice from anyone who's never sent and received payment for an invoice themselves. This goes back to the corporate refugee. You know, when you're a small entrepreneur, you go through a lot of these different programs and people love to give advice. But if you've never sent an invoice, I'm sorry. I don't think we should be talking. Okay. Number 3, get a business coach. Okay. Trust me on this because it can just save you a lot of time and heartache. You know, one of the reasons I learned to invoice up front was because I had a really bad cash flow situation at one point, and I asked my business coach for advice, and he told me to invoice up front moving forward. I didn't even know that was a thing, right? I thought you did the work, then you got paid. And that was just an eye-opening experience for me. And you'd be surprised how many entrepreneurs I come across that have really bad cash flow issues. And then I ask them, what's their sales cycle look like? How are they charging, et cetera? You know, they're not invoicing up front. So get a business coach. There's a lot of wisdom there and there's skin in the game for you and for them. And then number 4, get a virtual assistant, right? When you're running a business, your goal is to drive revenue, shake hands and kiss babies. Okay. There's a lot of admin stuff that you're going to have to do early on, right? But the minute you get margin, you need somebody to help cover down on that stuff, because for you in the early stages, your time is your most valuable asset. And you're going to start to quickly realize you are losing money trying to do these administrative tasks when it would be better for you mentally, physically, and spiritually to have somebody cover down on that and then let that be your new normal. Now, it's always a risk when you do it, because what if this doesn't work out and stuff, et cetera? But trust me on the virtual assistant thing, you want to stick with it, because once you unlock it, now it's going to free you up to drive more value for your company.
Mike, all I could think of is something we used to say at the Naval Academy. At least when I was there, don't learn from your mistakes. It's painful. Learn from someone else's mistakes.
100%.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tom.
What an incredible conversation with Iron Mike Steadman. Now, if there's one thing that I hope you walk away with, it's this. You don't need to outspend the competition. You need to outthink them. Mike reminded us that being different, it's not a liability. It's your superpower. Whether you're a veteran, a corporate refugee, or someone who refuses to be average, you have the power to design your own category and own the problem you solve. That's what real differentiation looks like. And podcast interviews are an ideal way to build that category authority. So here's your next step. Ask yourself, what do I want to be known for? Now, this isn't your job title. It's not your services, but it's the category that you and only you can own. Then look at your podcast interviews. Are you amplifying that message consistently? Are you sharing a strong point of view? Because as Mike says, if you don't know your category, neither do your customers. Lead with value. And always remember, you don't need everyone to like you. You just need the right people to know exactly who you are and what you stand for. Until next time, keep showing up, keep speaking up, and keep standing out.